Hey everybody, it's Notorious here. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about how to use a figure eight or a rescue eight, any type of descender of that variety, which I'll show you in a second, and how you can utilize what's known as a third hand. And a third hand is basically a safety mechanism that is generally a Prusik, and you install it either above the descender or below the descender. And I'm going to show you both of those options. So first thing first, I'm going to show you something now that is optional. It is, in order to be able to demonstrate this to you, first of all, this is not really a standard or popular, rather, arborist technique. This is more popular in the rappelling and canyoning and rock climbing world. But, you know, I'm trying to have a very eclectic channel, and I'm trying to touch on as many different types of climbing and climbing styles and gear as I can. And so what I've done here is, in order to optimize my harness, which is normally, it's got this longer bridge with a ring, I installed a second, much shorter bridge. And in order to organize the pieces that I'm going to show you, I'm going to connect everything to this pulley here, this triple connection hitch climber pulley. This is completely optional. I'm just throwing this in there to show you that there are many ways to do this, and this is just one. You are more than welcome to just connect these pieces to your bridge and have it that way. So now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's get to it. So I'm going to install the hitch climber pulley, and next we're going to install the rescue eight. The difference between a rescue eight and a figure eight, if you don't know, is merely the ears. So that's the only difference. The ears allow you to better lock off, and I find that to be valuable. Now, in order to install it, I'm going to grab a bite in this direction, but I'm going to pull it through the top of the device and then bring it around the bottom like that. Now that I've done that, I'm going to connect the carabiner. I use triple action, meaning they require 3 distinct motions to open carabiners, but you're welcome to use any type you want. I would just recommend that it would be at least locking. So that's important. Now I've got this, and I'm going to connect it to the right side of my hitch climber pulley. And now that I've done this, I have some options. Because I put it onto the right side, that means I'm going to show you first how to connect a third hand to the top or above the rescue eight. So in order to do that, I need a carabiner, and I need a loop, a sewn loop, and I need a Prusik. This is sometimes known as a VT Prusik. That's more of a brand name than what it actually is. It's truly called an eye-to-eye Prusik, and I'll show you what we do with that in a minute. But you'll also need a third carabiner here. I recommend using a small, this is a DMM Perfecto. It is a smaller version of this carabiner, which is the DMM Ultra O. So first thing first, I'm going to take this carabiner and I'm going to install this loop. I don't need the full length, so I'm going to twist and then bring it, fold it over. You don't really have to worry too much about all the little twists you see here. It's not going to make that much of a difference. Now I'm going to connect this carabiner, and then I'm going to connect this to the far left side of my pulley here. Now, if you were to just connect this to your bridge directly, then you could just have it right up next to each other like that. No problems with that. Just I would recommend that you oppose the gates on your carabiner, and what that means is if you were to have it on your bridge side to side, you would want to make sure that this pulley here has the gate facing in the opposite direction. It's not as big of a deal with this type of carabiner, the triple locking or triple action, whatever you want to call it, because they're very hard to open next to one another with the gates on the same side. But it can happen, and you know, if you do it directly on your bridge where there's no separation here, you might want to definitely consider it. And also, if you have regular locking carabiners with the screw gate, then you're going to for sure want to have the gates opposing. So now that I have this half length here loop runner, I'm going to take this Prusik and I'm going to tie what is known as a Valdotain Tresse. This is the only type of hitch that I would personally recommend to use above a device like this, because when you do this, it's going to take all of your weight and load it into that friction hitch, and that can cause it to jam, and you might find yourself stuck on your rope, unable to unjam your hitch, and that could be really problematic. However, I'm going to show you next another hitch that you can use, that a lot of people do use, but I personally wouldn't recommend it. Anyways, so if you don't know how to tie a VT or Valdotain Tresse, I have several videos for it. Just search VT, or we'll search Valdotain Tresse and then Notorious, and it should come up. Notorious with a K, of course. And then, so I'm going to tie the hitch, and when you're tying it, it's always important to alternate the legs, but I talk about that at length in many of my videos, so I'm not going to get into it. So now I've gotten the hitch, and I'm going to now take my small carabiner. Doesn't have to be small, but it's preferable, and I'm going to connect it into this loop. So now I've got that, And what this does is it will grab my weight. And this is great because if I'm, doing my normal rappelling and I'm going down and let's say a rock comes loose, knocks me unconscious, then when I let go, it's going to catch all of my weight. And the way you use this is you simultaneously, when you want to descend, you simultaneously lightly pull down on the top of this hitch, and with your brake hand you slowly let in rope. So it's just very easy like that. And that's really all there is to that. Make sure that your hitch is properly dressed and set before you go and get going, because it would be a real disaster if like, for example, anytime when you're not in an emergency situation where you've lost consciousness or anything, always using a simultaneous sort of just ease into the hitch. So don't just assume that it's going to grab. And if you have any difficulties, then you at least still have your hand on the brake strand, and you're not going to completely tumble and lose control. So now that I've shown you this version, the next version is to show you how to do this with a Prusik, a regular you could do a 6-coil or a 4-coil Prusik, and this is how many people do this. And it eliminates a piece of equipment because you don't need to have you don't need an extra carabiner. You don't need the eye-to-eye. You just use a single sewn Prusik loop. So with this, you also don't need this loop runner. So I'm going to remove that. Okay, so now that I've got this, I'm using a long, I think this is 25-inch Prusik loop, and what you're going to do now is simply make just make anywhere from 4 to 6 wraps around the rope, depending on how much friction you want. And once you've done that, set it and dress it, and then all you do is same as before, connect it to your carabiner, your second carabiner, and then So now, when you've done this, you can, same as before, ease yourself into it, and it will grab if you were to lose consciousness or needed to let go of the strand, the brake strand. This is great for all the same reasons as the other one, and just like last time, when you want to descend, you simultaneously feed in the rope to the descender, and you should already have this broken and loose, and you can just go down like that. This, like I said, might be preferable. I would prefer a VT just because this can potentially jam so badly that you can not get it undone, which is why some people do less wraps. They do only 4 wraps because it's theoretically a little easier to break. But that's all up to you. Finally, the last option is the same sort of thing, except this time you'll be doing it below the device. So instead of doing it above, you're going to do it below. And what that entails is, if this time you want to have this off to the left, on the left side, and now you're going to take this figure 8 and you need to extend it. So you need your good old friend, the loop again, and you're gonna, once again, you don't need the full length. This time I'm gonna attach it by simply putting it through the bottom of the device, and now I'm going to just clip in, like I said, off to the left side, and this gives you important separation. And finally, the next step is going to be going back to the eye-to-eye hitch cord, or eye-to-eye Prusik, and you just need to, there are a number of hitches that you can choose to use. I'm just going to use a Prusik, a regular 6-coil Prusik. Now the reason this is preferable to the other situation where it's above is because something like 75% of my body weight is going to be held in this device. So that means this hitch here is only going to hold about 25%. Don't quote me on those numbers, but it's something like that. Now I'm going to set and dress this. So that means it's going to be infinitely easier to release this hitch below the device versus above the device. And it's also, you don't want a long hitch. You don't want to use something like a VT down here. It's completely unnecessary because it's going to get, you don't want it to get close to the device because they could touch and that could cause the hitch to just release and then you could just drop. Assuming, you know, you had your hand off the brake strand, like in an emergency situation where you've lost consciousness. And that would be a catastrophic failure there. You would not want that. So now I'm connecting it onto the other side of the pulley. You can of course have it side to side, opposing gates on your bridge or your belay loop. I didn't mean to exclude all the people who use rock climbing harnesses. I keep saying bridge, but of course you can use a harness with a belay loop or, you know, something similar like that. And so now with this up here, it's the same deal. And in order to descend, I just, you know, will depress this down here very lightly, and this will cause me to get lowered to the ground. Now, I forgot to show you that in the previous option where I showed you that you can have the friction hitch above the device. In order to lock off, what you do with this type of descender is you bring it around and through the back, and then around once, around twice, and then you can feed it through and bring it around the ears like that. And that is a total lock off. That is how you would completely keep the device from releasing you and ensure that you don't fall when you need both hands. Now, it's a little different with, of course, you could certainly do that with a friction hitch like with it below the device as well. As I just showed you, it's completely possible. So, but another way that you can do it, if you were so inclined, if you didn't feel like, if you were just relying on your hitch to hold you and you just wanted a little safety backup, then you could just tie a quick overhand on a bite, and that would ensure that if this hitch would slip, that it would quickly be stopped by this stopper knot here. Hey everyone, Notorious again. Sorry to jump back into my own video abruptly, but I had posted or published this video to YouTube today, and a keen-eyed commenter noticed that I had failed to show a second method for rappelling with this setup, with the hitch below the descender, in a way that is probably safer, or I would say it is safer, for people who have less skill, or whose skill level is not as high as perhaps myself or other people who have climbed a little longer. Now, the way I had shown, well, you know how I showed it because you just watched the video, but another way to descend with this setup that is safer is to hold the brake strand with your right hand, or you can reverse this setup, of course, but in this arrangement, it would be hold the brake strand with your right hand, and then with your left hand, depress the Prusik. And that will give you much more control over what you're doing. The way I had shown it, where you just depress the Prusik and you don't have your hand on the brake strand, is something I started doing because of my experience using a rope wrench. With a rope wrench, you also have a device that takes a lot of the forces above it, and then you have a hitch below it. And when you use a rope wrench, you do not have your hand on the brake strand. You just put all your faith in the hitch, and what you would do, and I didn't explain this earlier on, is when you depress it, you can squeeze it to stop it. So you can squeeze the hitch nice and firmly, and that'll stop you and allow you to ease the hitch into position where it should. It always has for me, where it'll grab. And that's how I've been doing it for a long time. I also should mention, and this is another important safety tip, and that's the reason I took the video offline and decided to add this to it before reposting again, is I take safety very seriously, and I didn't want anyone to get hurt. So anyways, the other safety tip is you can, below you, while you're rappelling with either of these systems, so you take up some of the slack below you, and then when you get to about, several feet below you, you can create a clove hitch, and then with the clove hitch, you put it inside of a carabiner, and then you can attach that to your harness. So with this setup, that would I gotta take this off. So then I'd put this in the middle hole, or in the middle if you have it on your belay loop or bridge, and then you can just clip this right on there, and this will serve as a backup. So that way, if you're descending and you happen to lose control, you'll only fall so far. This would hurt a lot with a static rope, but if you're doing this with a dynamic rope, this is a huge lifesaver. I'm not saying you can't do this with a static rope. It's still better than falling to the ground. And so, yeah, that's really all I had to add, but it was important enough for me to add it. Oh, one more thing. Before I go, I wanted to let you know that the way that I've shown you to attach the rope to the figure 8 descender is not your only option. Here's another option and another way that a lot of people do it, and it all depends on how much friction you want in the system. So I've added a link to one of my videos where I share with you 7 or 6 different ways to set up a figure 8, and most of them allow you to use these rappel techniques that I've shown you today with them. Okay, that's it. And that's just another option. So, yeah, this has been my tutorial on how to use third hands, because you only have two. You might want a third. This is a third hand, and how you can use them with a figure eight or a rescue eight, whichever one you use, and some of the components and gear involved in creating these rappel systems. So I hope you found this to be helpful. I hope this wasn't too long and boring, but I did my best. Thanks so much for watching. Check out my channel for more hitch how-tos, climbing videos, and knot tutorials. That's all I have for now. Bye.